Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with today's co-host, Nick Segelsi. And today we have the one and only Melissa Petty in one of the best SDR leader interviews we've ever had, and I know why. Because she worked as director of SDR under KD at ServiceTitan and now is the head of SDR over at AirGarage. Nick, why should people listen?
So Melissa was the director of sales development at ServiceTitan, where there were literally over 100 SDRs, 11 SDR managers, and she knows cold how to make sure your SDRs get better, get booking meetings, and those meetings that they book actually turn into real revenue for your org. We went through everything from how you should be running and structuring your SDR one-on-ones, how you can get your SDRs to actually forecast the meetings that they're going to book, how you actually coach those folks, and how you remove a lot of the burden on yourself from running and driving the coaching that they get. This one was really, really good if you oversee any substance of SDR teams.
And 3, 2, 1, let's roll. Alrighty, Melissa, welcome to the show. We start every leadership show with your top 3 actionable takeaways. Let's get your 3.
My first one is time block calendars for your managers. So in your manager playbook, document the expectations and responsibilities for a manager. So what I like to do for my manager's schedule is I actually like to provide them with the actual breakdown on where they need to spend their time for the week. So at the beginning of the week, they focus on one-on-ones because you want to make sure that you have your reps focus on a goal at the beginning of the week and that there's alignment. And then middle of the week, we actually listen to some of the calls that they've had already during that week, usually a good call and a not so great call, so that we start identifying trends so that at the end of the week, when we do our actual role play coaching session, we have something very tactical that we could focus on to get better at. And then we just revisit that at the beginning of the week to just validate that, hey, we've been working on this and there's been some improvement in the one-on-one.
What's number 2?
Number 2, have a framework for coaching or difficult conversations. A lot of managers are thrown into leadership without any formal training on how to have difficult conversations. So the coaching framework that I like to use for conversations is the GROW framework. Essentially, you start with a goal. So what are we working toward? If this were my actual team, I would have a conversation with them where they're working toward becoming an AE. And then we talk about what's the actual reality of what's actually happening right now. So you haven't been performing the last month. And in order to move into the AE promoted role, you actually have to show over 100% quota attainment for the last 6 months. So how do we get back to aligning ourselves with that goal? And that's where we go into options. What can we actually do about it? And what are the options that we could plan out together to make sure you're back in line with your goal? And then the last part is what's the plan that we align on together and the actionable steps that we could revisit? And then the other piece is, what will you actually do? Because the execution is actually on you. I can't do this for you, but what I can do is hold you accountable to this plan that we collaborated on together and revisit to make sure that we're pacing toward the goal that you have in mind.
Amazing. Bring it home. What's number 3?
Number 3, create a tribal training culture with your managers. If you have a lot of managers that you have to oversee, pair your managers together based on their strengths and areas of growth. So one thing that I did at one of my last companies is I would actually pair an external manager that was coming in that would need help ramping up on the industry, on what ICP is, internal industry knowledge. I would pair that person up with an internal manager that was promoted from being an IC into a manager, because they're going to help them ramp up in that aspect. And on the same note, that external manager who has more seasoned leadership skills, such as interviewing and hiring, that newer manager who just got promoted from the front lines could also organically learn some things from that external seasoned manager.
All right, Melissa. So you oversaw an SDR org that had over 100 reps in it. And I want to zoom in a bit on You talked about this weekly rhythm where beginning of the week, you've got these one-on-ones to set the tone and the goal for the week. Midweek, you're getting into doing call reviews to start to identify areas that each individual needs to improve on and upskill on. And then the end of the week, you're actually doing role plays to help them get better. And I see how you create this really powerful feedback loop. I actually want to zoom in onto the beginning of the week and what goes into that one-on-one. Let's say Armand is an SDR on my team and I've got a meeting with him. What's actually going into that meeting? Am I just showing up and being like, all right, dude, make sure to keep prospecting. Good luck. See you later. What's the structure of that one-on-one?
We usually start off with the rep's agenda because, again, the one-on-one is designed for the rep and we want to make it as impactful possible. So I actually like to prioritize their agenda. So we kind of tackle all their action items or things that are clearly on their mind first. And then after we go through that, we go through pipeline review. We actually also have a call review. I asked reps to come to the table with an actual good call and not so great call with some commentary on there as well. And then we also go through essentially like what accounts that they should be working on or that they can forecast to essentially close for this week. We kind of wrap up with any career development things that they want to focus on. So we'll talk about like the Grow coaching framework. This is where we start pooling, okay, Sally, like you talked about, this is your first time in a sales role and like you have aspirations to move into a closing role. So we're talking about that and I'm understanding like where they want to be in the next 6 to 12 months so that I could also tie that back into some of the coaching conversations that we'll have.
Could you talk about, you run sales development. What does an SDR pipeline review look like?
Yeah, a pipeline review essentially is going through their different accounts that they believe that they're going to be able to book this week. We have different pipeline stages that help inform them if this is going to be a cold, warm, hot account. Hot account is ready to book. And essentially we're talking about, okay, this week, what meetings can you reasonably expect to book? And if these are the meetings that you're going to book, what is actually going to be that next step to get us to actually close on that? So we kind of dive deep into that book to understand what's their forecast and commitment for this week. And then we move up a level to the warm accounts, which are usually decision maker identified. Maybe I've had a conversation with them before, but they're still one step further from me being able to move it to the ready to book stage. So we kind of tactically go through that to understand what's it going to take to move that account to the next level.
So let's unpack this a little bit more because this is the first time I've heard about an SDR pipeline review. Melissa, you mentioned 3 types of accounts: cold, warm, and hot, ready to buy accounts. How are you even identifying those things in the first place?
Yeah, so a cold account is essentially research. They're brand new accounts. We haven't gotten in contact. Essentially, a warm account is we know that this is an actual qualified account, and we've also engaged with the decision maker or a gatekeeper to identify that we've gotten in contact with them. There could be various states of conversations. Maybe it's an initial conversation. Maybe it is an interested pre-pitch or post-pitch conversation, but I've gotten in contact with someone and I know that these accounts are qualified, which we all know in the sales development world is half the battle. And then the hot bucket would be, I've gotten in contact with the decision maker. There is some interest there. Now it's about scheduling that next step to actually book that meeting. So I try to simplify it to make it really easy for a rep to understand, because I've been a part of organizations where there's a lot of different stages and people can't keep up with it, especially if you don't actually define it very clearly. Temperatures are very easy to remember, like it's cold, warm, or hot accounts. And then we also like label it internally so we know from a leadership standpoint what this means.
Well, this is really interesting because what it basically does is it provides a mechanism to remind your SDR that they need to keep feeding new accounts and new prospects into their sequences or cadences or into their, I'm going to start reaching out to new people. Because one of the things that I know plagued me when I was first in SDR was I never refreshed the companies or people that I was reaching out to. I just kept reaching people again and again and again. And what you're doing is saying, okay, it's okay to have cold people in my pipeline. Those are people that I'm actively adding into sequence. I'm researching. They're going to turn into the warm and the hot ones. The warm ones, I've started sequencing and I need to keep the pressure on them. I need to keep reaching out. And then it sounds like the hot ones are like, all right, they've responded and now we're just trying to get something on the calendar. I got to make sure I stay on this person so that they don't slip. And what this helps them do is stay oriented around the goal that they have, also what they need to do to feed that.
So you have the 3 different categories, cold, warm, and hot. Are they bringing all 200 accounts categorized cold, warm, and hot? You talked about they need to come with the accounts that they think they can break into. How many accounts are they actually bringing to the table, and how do you expect that to be structured?
That's going to vary across the board. So right now at AirGarage, we're doing more account-based selling. So it's going to be a smaller book of accounts. So typically at any given point, a rep could work anywhere from 25 to 30 accounts. So what's actually in the ready to book every week, only between like 2 to 3 accounts if you're running a healthy funnel, because the majority of your accounts are going to be in like the research required stage or the decision maker identified.
Interesting. So let's say that you have an account that is warm. You've already gotten in touch with them. Your SDR says, Melissa, here's my one warm account. What do you do from there in that conversation with your SDR?
So we would dive a little bit deeper into it. So this is decision maker identified. I would look into the account and look and see, who did you actually get in contact with? Is this like the right persona? Because there's a little bit calibration there. And we actually went through a whole journey, kind of recalibrating on the right personas that showed that there was a higher probability of conversion and also win rates on the closing side of the house. So I would make sure that they're actually talking to a VP of asset management or someone that has like decision-making authority. Because if I look at the account and it turned out they only had a conversation with a property manager, I might not necessarily put this account as warm as it needs to be.
So this is something that's extremely important to point out. And the reason for that is, Melissa, oftentimes what SDR organizations do is they only tear down cold calls and cold emails. And the problem is there are 3 places that conversion can go wrong. It can go wrong in your account and prospect targeting, which is the first step. And frankly, that's the most common mistake that I see with SDRs. It can go wrong in the calls and it can go wrong in the emails. And if you see calls that just seem a little bit off, you're like, this doesn't seem like the right persona, but it seems like they're saying the right things. Now you actually have to backwards track to figure out if they were even targeting the right accounts. So you're starting the coaching at the top of the process and aligning on the account strategy so they don't spend weeks working the wrong accounts and the wrong people. And then you have to basically go and correct 4 weeks of mistakes. So this is brilliant.
So how do you actually go and have that conversation? Because one of the things I imagine is like, you have SDRs targeting the wrong companies or targeting the wrong people. And you might have an SDR who's really, really excited that they're like, hey, this property manager, they responded to my email, or I got them on a phone and they told me to send them a note. And they believe, the SDRs, that property manager is going to be able to take them all the way up the chain to the real estate owner. And you just know that that's not going to happen. How do you have that micro coaching conversation of like, hey, you got to focus your efforts elsewhere?
It's kind of like hosting your own little discovery question. So as leaders, we can certainly tell them what the right answer is, but I oftentimes want to teach them and enable the skill set to try to figure that out on their own. So I would actually ask them probing questions on, why did you decide to pursue like this lead? What type of conversation did you had with him or her to make you believe that this opportunity has legs, or that they're going to go and champion you to the decision maker? What actual gaps did you find from this individual where we could actually create value with our solution that you believe that this individual also believes in the same gaps? Because it's not just about us finding the gaps. They also have to believe like this is going to be worthwhile for them too, for them to stick their neck out on the line to their boss and position a new tool that may or may not work. And then usually through that conversation, what we're either going to uncover is 2 things, one of which is they actually got tangible gaps that have them believe with conviction, Like based off of this conversation, like I uncovered that occupancy has been down, NOI has been down. They also see the same trends and they want to take this to their boss because this is what they're being measured on. Or we have the latter conversation, which is actually, I didn't really find anything and they seemed like they were interested. They asked me to send an email. And that's when we start uncovering, well, there isn't really much of substance there. And we've seen also with our data, when we analyze our close won and close loss opportunities for the quarter, we have seen that property managers close at the lowest win rate out of any of our personas. So why do you believe like this opportunity would be different? And you get them thinking and reflecting on how actually meaningful is this opportunity?
The manager, you find yourself fishing for topics for discussion, then that means you have not properly set the expectation with your reps that it's on them to come to every coaching call with a point of view on what could be improved or what their strategy is to break into an account. And I see this oftentimes with entry level SDR managers where they pull up their dashboard, they're the one screen sharing, and they're trying to dive into every single metric. SDR is just sort of sitting there. And not only, number one, is that exhausting, number two, it doesn't train your SDRs to think properly. So you're actually getting them to think about an AE plan in terms of how they would break and cut across an organization.
A lot of new leaders think that it is on them to run and drive the meeting with the person that reports up to them. And what I'm learning is it's actually the inverse. You need to ask that person to run the meeting. And I assume that most sales organizations don't do it that way. And so when you have somebody new join your team, they don't understand that they need to come to these meetings ready to drive them. And so when you're onboarding or first setting the expectation with those folks, how do you actually explain that to them? What do you say so that you don't start with a bunch of really crummy meetings in their first pivotal month?
It starts in onboarding. Those first like 30 days when they come to the table, we set the expectations of SDR and we actually map out what the expectations of SDR is, not only from a performance standpoint. I think a lot of organizations highlight this is what quota is. This is the minimum bar of acceptable performance before you're on a performance improvement plan. Here are the actual dials and inputs that you have to do day in and day out. But they also don't talk about like the behaviors of a top performing rep, which is you come to the table prepared with an agenda and your one-on-one doc filled out, and you're driving this meeting because you own the outcome. I can help you get to the outcome, but in terms of execution, that's on you. And we actually map out the behaviors of a top performing rep. So coming to the table prepared with your one-on-one and agenda set up, doing call reviews proactively, and even going as far as potentially listening to AE disco calls so you could really align your questions to what an AE is asking to uncover similar gaps. And you're also role playing, right? You're doing game tape reviews. You're not waiting until live game time in order to practice. You're actually paying attention, listening to your calls, being maniacally focused on where are those trends? Where am I dropping off on a call? Why am I losing on that call and not booking it? Is it because I'm not handling the what is it that you guys do or what makes you different value prop strong enough? And if I'm not, then I'm just on it over and over and over again so that the next time that call comes up live in real time, I'm not going to miss. And that's how you start getting like really prescriptive and really focus on, your process and also tactically trying to improve that aspect of it.
You've mentioned call reviews a few times, and knowing how much structure you have to your one-on-ones, my guess is you're being pretty structured in the way that you run a call review as well. How do you run an SDR cold call review?
We focus on 2 calls. So we usually do a meeting booked call. That's a good call. Reps love coming to the table with that one. And then we do a not interested post pitch call. So that's obviously not a good call where the outcome did not turn out the way that it did. We do have an SDR scorecard that focuses on like 3 really important things, which is our value props. Did you actually help the prospect understand where our value props are? Did you also focus on asking gap questions and actually uncovering and learning more about their process in order to diagnose, what the future state looks like, which is us, AirGarage, and what we could do for your parking asset. And then we kind of come to the table with the quantifiable score and then also a qualitative score, because we use Avoma and actually comment on the actual call. So I have them doing the quantitative score, but also doing the qualitative feedback on those particular areas of the call, because then we need more context. It's not as simple as a 1 through 5, like this was good. Expand on why do you think you got a 5 on uncovering 1 to 2 gaps. Walk through that. Well, it's because I asked a process question to understand what their current operations look like or what their current operator is doing to increase the NOI at the lot. Okay, that's a little bit more meatier than just a pure like 5 score without any context.
How do you teach SDRs to ask gap questions? And the reason I say that is because oftentimes you can teach SDRs, you hear not interested, here are the 3 steps to handle not interested, you hear no budget, here are the 2 steps to handle no budget. And I find that when you start to get into discovery territory with SDRs, just their level of understanding around the product is so thin and the pain points are so thin that they actually really struggle to do almost lightweight discovery on a call. So how do you make that more accessible for a junior rep?
We certainly don't go as deep as an AE would, but we do enable them with the gap selling framework. And I usually start training off with like, okay, what do you actually think you need to know in order to ask the gap question? And oftentimes a rep would say, I need product knowledge. I don't know the product as much as I should. But actually, the reality is they don't need to know that much about the product, because it's not about us. It's about the prospect and us just asking questions about, what they're currently doing. So I could kind of boil down the questions to, it's like 3 types of questions: process question, provoking question, or a probing question. So process question would just be like, what is your current operator doing right now to market your lot? A question would be kind of diving a little bit deeper into their current operations. So you're asking them, what is Laz doing right now to increase the NOI at your lot? And then a provoking question is trying to get them to think about a different perspective that they may not be aware of. So occupancy has been high. Like, I don't need you guys. Like, my lot's full all the time. Well, great. I'm really happy that your lot is full. But what are you doing to ensure that you're making the most out of every parker that comes to your lot? Well, what do you mean by that? Is there a way for you to dynamically price your lot based on demand in the area? That gets them to think about it from a different way. Instead of just like, my lot's full all the time. Well, that's great. But how are you ensuring that you're making like the most money out of each of the parkers there? It's just a different perspective that starts planting a seed of doubt about their current operations, which is status quo. Another thought I had also too about like gap questions, I teach them, they're usually what, how, and why questions, right? And if you just operate with a level of curiosity, trying to understand what are you guys currently doing, how are you doing it, and why are you doing it, that is a great North Star that won't lead you astray. But what reps oftentimes do is they think it has to be about us. So I'm going to come in and say like, AirGarage is the fastest growing parking operator within the nation because we can help increase your revenue, decrease costs, and save time. And they make it about themselves, when in actuality, it's not about us, right? We're trying to give the future state before we even understand what's your current state, where are those opportunities, before we could kind of present to you what the future state looks like. So I really try to get the reps focused on your job is just to learn about the current state. You can ask these questions and sometimes you might uncover a gap and you might not. Either way, it's okay. You're doing something to try to learn about the prospect to find those opportunities. And if you do find a gap, that's just more ammo for your AE to come to the table and really curate their disco around an actual gap that you found. And that makes a higher quality meeting than someone who just booked a meeting because sure, like I'm interested in entertaining another proposal, but they really have no buying interest at all.
If I wanted to train my team on gap questions, how would I go about doing that today? Do you have a pick chart? I'm familiar with gap selling where your problem, your impact, and then your root cause? Do you have a current state and list of example gap questions so that it's easy for your SDRs to understand? How did you actually roll this out to your team?
We actually broke it down. So, like those three different types of questions that we focused on, every week we would do a training on that. I would actually incorporate an exercise for the team to actually pair up with each other and talk about, okay, what are some current state problems that a parking lot owner would face? And they start talking and discussing amongst themselves. And then we would actually reverse engineer it and go, what are some questions that you could ask to uncover that occupancy or that gates are breaking down? And they would come up with questions that fall under the process, provoking, and probing questions, so that essentially they have a whole list of questions that also serves two-pronged, because when they do that exercise, they come up with these questions, and now you could leave this actual training with actual questions that you could use in a conversation to uncover if someone is struggling with gates breaking down at their parking lot.
Melissa, one of the best episodes we've ever had on just how to coach an SDR team, specifically on cold calling, but in all different things. We've talked about a lot of good habits, and we end every interview to cross a bad one off the list. And so the final question is, what is one bad habit that every sales leader should break so that all sales teams get a little bit better?
The one habit I would say, and I've been guilty of this, is thinking that you can do it all, right? Thinking that when you first transition into leadership, it's your job to figure it out for everyone and come to the table with answers. But do not be afraid to delegate. Surround yourself with really good people and delegate some of those responsibilities to others. It also creates a great culture to give people additional scope of responsibilities. And you would be surprised at how many people rise to the occasion.
Boom. Folks, amazing episode. Everyone hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Cheers. All right, Nick, it is time for the 2x2 recap. What are your two?
So my first one was the structure for an SDR one-on-one is as follows. First, let them start with their agenda. What's top of mind for them? From there, go into the pipe review of the meetings that they have upcoming to book. Cold, warm, and hot potential meetings. From there, they should be bringing both a good call and a bad call for you to review in that meeting. The last piece, you are going to be doing a forecast with them of the meetings that are going to be booked. And then the last piece, it's a reorientation around their career goals and where they are looking to go to keep them oriented around why they're doing all this work in the first place. So that's my first takeaway. My second one was when you are running these one-on-ones, you should not be the one driving the agenda and driving the meeting. You need to put that responsibility onto the SDR. You shouldn't be the one screen sharing their pipe numbers. You shouldn't be the one hunting for a call to review. You need to tell them they need to do these things and set that expectation with them when they are onboarding. Otherwise, you're going to be working way too much and they won't feel like they own their development and their improvement.
Number 3. The cold, warm, and hot accounts that Nick mentioned should be structured as follows. The cold accounts are people that have never replied. The warm ones are the people that you've gotten in touch with. And the hot ones are the ones that you've gotten in touch with and they've expressed interest. And what you want your SDRs to do is you want them to come in with a point of view on who they got in touch with, how they're going to convert them into a meeting, and what they mean in the broader organizational context so that they're starting to understand how an account works as if they were an AE. And then lastly, number 4, I got to give it up for my gap questions. The way that Melissa trained her team on those is she talked about 3 types of gap questions: process questions, provoking questions, and probing questions. So what you do is you have your team write down what you want the prospect to say, and then come up with 2 or 3 gap questions for each of those things so they can think through their own playbooks. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out?
Armand, I always love the episodes where I see you having an epiphany and learning something. And on this episode, I saw a sly smile on your face when she was talking about the SDR pipe review and the different stages. And it's always nice when you have a smile on your face. And folks, if you want to see that same sickening grin on Armand's face, you can watch. It wasn't sickening, but it was a nice grin. If you want to see that grin, you can now watch 30 Minutes to President's Club on YouTube and see our facial reactions during the interview. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week on the show.